going and we'll get started. We good? Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. We appreciate you coming out to this public meeting. I just wanted to take a second and thank you for being here. This is a public information meeting, an opportunity to learn about some things that we have going on here at the school with our drinking water and our wastewater facilities. They are nearing the end of their useful life and they're at capacity now. So we have to make some decisions going forward as to what we'll do as a school system to ensure we have adequate drinking and wastewater facilities. As a result, the school has been working with Mountain Waterworks over the last couple of years, doing some studies and engineering studies to figure out what our best options are. And that's what they're going to present to us tonight, are these options. It's an opportunity for members of the public to ask questions, to educate themselves, so that we all have a clear understanding of where we're at and where we're going. So with that in mind, Christina and Stuart are here from Mountain Waterworks. Thanks for being here. And I'm going to turn the time over to Stuart, and he'll go through a slideshow.
Thanks, Randy. Yeah, so as Randy mentioned, we are really on the tail end of completing water and wastewater facility planning studies on behalf of the school district. And I guess I want to remind everyone, so this is a public information meeting, and after this meeting, there will be a 30-day comment period. So written comments are welcome for the next 30 days on any comments or questions regarding this discussion tonight. So the agenda, we're going to talk about facility plans. What are they? Then we're going to talk about the water system, the wastewater system, kind of go over some alternatives and the estimated costs associated with those alternatives, and then talk about funding plan and opportunities. And then we have Michael Keith here, who is the school's financial consultant. And so he will be talking about some of the financial analysis and impacts. So what is a facility plan? Really what it does is for specific for water and wastewater utilities. So we evaluate existing conditions. So we have population, which equates to capacity. We have the physical condition of the facilities, and then we have regulatory compliance. So those three factors really are what we look at from an existing conditions. And then we project future conditions. So a big part of that again is what is the anticipated annual growth over the next 20 years? And then what does that result in capacity? And then also from a regulatory compliance perspective, what changes could be anticipated in the next 20 years that might have to be dealt with today? And then you kind of boil all that together and then develop alternatives to address whatever those needs are. Then you screen the alternatives, actually pick, this is what I want to do. And that's not just financially based, that's also based on environmental considerations and other non-economic factors. And then we hold a public meeting. So really that's kind of where we are here tonight. And then coming out of this, there will be an alternative that the board selects to move forward. So again, from a project perspective, there's really three phases, and we're in this first planning phase. Then that would be followed by design and construction. You know, globally, these tend to be somewhere between 3 and 5 years kind of in total on these projects. I would like to say that there is a 50% matching planning grant through Idaho Department of Environmental Quality. So that's a great benefit from a financial perspective to complete this work. And again, here are the steps in the planning. And where we're at really is, so we've received approval from DEQ on the technical draft of these documents. And so now we're going through this public process. And again, ultimately, we will work through the environmental and then the board will select an alternative. So getting into some of the nuts and bolts, pretty unique situation where a school is on its own water and wastewater system. You know, oftentimes schools are part of municipal systems and quite honestly don't have to deal with these utilities. And also it's pretty unique because of the swings in flow based on the occupancy. So very, very seasonal occupancy here. Obviously, you know, Monday through Friday, it's busy. Weekends can, if there's some events, and then over the summer, pretty minimal. So really, this is kind of how we had to look at this from again, a wastewater and a water capacity analysis of kind of looking at these different occupancies and uses. And really what it boils down to is the system needs to be flexible. That's a big item. So then we worked with the board and we looked at projections. And so kind of going from the current state, we projected out 20 years. So we looked at not only the number of students, but the number of staff, because obviously both students and staff are using these utilities. And really what we landed on in concurrence with the board was a 2.5% annual growth rate, which again equates to, from a student perspective, roughly about 300, upwards of over 450. And then from a staffing perspective, from about 50 to almost 100. So some fairly significant increases projected over that 20-year planning period. And so those were the projections that were used for both the water and the wastewater, looking out into the future. So here are the existing facilities. So kind of going through this, there's a well in this well house, and then coming out of that, there's water service. Here's the school. Here's the football field. Down here is the fire suppression lagoon. So there's actually a lagoon that stores water. Then there's a pump system right here that pumps fire flow out if needed. Sorry, could I ask you to sign in, please? Thank you. So those are really the main facilities. And so for supply, again, there's a single well and well house that serves the entire system. Here's a photo of that well. Some of the interior piping and mechanical components, they're at the end of their useful life and could use replacement and upgrades. And then we also have the storage and transmission and distribution system. And we'll talk about some of the challenges associated with that. Here's a photo of the fire pump. So this is a pump that's connected to the fire suppression lagoon that would provide fire flow to the facility if there is a need. Here's a picture of the storage lagoon down here. And one of the big challenges with this storage lagoon, this is clean water out of the well, but it does sit out in the environment in this open pond. So one of the concerns is water quality in that pond. So for example, if there were a fire and that water were to be used for a fire, the concern is it would, could potentially, plug sprinkler heads and really wouldn't be a great functional system when it's needed. So to kind of list the deficiencies here, so from a supply perspective, there's only one well, so there's no redundancy on the well. There is, again, some upgrade needs with the well house mechanical piping. There's a chemical feed system that's kind of outdated and could use some controls. Standby storage or generator. So that's another big issue. If there's a power outage, the school loses its water supply completely because there is no standby power. And then again, from the fire suppression system, really a big thing there is the water quality, but also water conservation. There's a lot of evaporation, a lot of loss in that pond. So that is just water that has to be kept there. And it's just a use that isn't really required. Whoops. So looking at the 20-year projected water supply versus demand, really the existing facilities have the capacity, the well in particular, to really supply water out into the future. That's really not the concern here. Again, the main concern is just no backup and the lack of standby power. Those are a couple of the big limitations from a supply perspective. So as far as alternatives for the water system, so we have source of supply. So there is well house improvements and potentially a second well for redundancy. We have the fire suppression system. So really the alternatives under that would be a new storage tank that would essentially protect the water from the environment, or a lagoon cover. So a cover could be placed over that lagoon, and that would help mitigate the algae growth, but also some of the evaporative losses. Booster pumping. So in combination with the storage tank, if a booster pump was installed, that could provide a good source of redundancy for the system. So if something were to happen with the well and you have a water tank there, that water could be used for supply. And then we have standby power. Again, that would be a new well or a generator for the well house.
Let's go to the next question.
Sure.
So if we had a new tank, a storage tank, and let's say our well went out, could water be pumped into that tank, like from a water truck to keep the system going?
It could.
An alternate source until the well's replaced. Is that also another benefit of having a tank?
For sure, but the better benefit is you're going to have water in that tank that will supply, at least a week's worth or so of supply.
Okay.
Right.
So we may have time to replace the well.
Correct. Correct. And that's what we'd look at with sizing of the tank, and we'd work with you guys to say, hey, what kind of it's called redundancy storage in that case.
Yeah, that would be the concern for the school. If the well goes out,
right.
We're dead in water.
Yep. Yep. And then again, looking at the deficiencies, so we just what we did is took the alternatives and then kind of cross-referenced that with the deficiencies that we had listed. So, you see the well house improvements, that kind of handles the bare minimum, so to speak. That's kind of fix some of the existing equipment. And then we have a new well house. So that would be essentially constructing a second well, new storage tank. And this storage tank is really just to replace the lagoon. So one step further would be down here would be a storage tank and a booster station. So you have that storage tank there, so it could be used for both fire supply and just needs for the system. Lagoon cover, really that's a water quality issue. Standby power, again, that kind of takes care of itself there. And then one option that's required by DEQ to look at is regionalization. And if there were an opportunity to regionalize, that would check a lot of these boxes. The challenge with that is there just isn't that opportunity that we're aware of to regionalize with any nearby water systems. There is no, water district or water authority here that would kind of control that. So essentially that entity would have to be formed to gather the water systems together. And then there's the no action alternative. And again, that's something that the DEQ requires we look at, and that is an option for the board to select is, hey, we're not comfortable moving forward with anything. That's the no action alternative. And then here are the estimated costs for these various alternatives. And so we kind of ordered them. So the minimum deficiencies, really what we would suggest is under any of the alternatives to address the existing deficiencies. And then it really kind of builds from there. So a new well and well house, pump station, generator, storage tank, lagoon cover. And these can kind of be mixed and matched a little bit, but what we did is we put them in alternatives that really made sense to kind of get the best value for the system. So as you can see, estimated construction costs range from about $90,000 to almost $2 million. So those are kind of the bookends, so to speak, on this. And then there's kind of combinations in between thereof. So again, this is the type of thing we'll work through with the board, considering not only the costs, but some of these other items that we've talked about before. And then also we look at the environmental impact. And I won't go through all of these. Certainly if there are questions, please ask that. And it's just kind of tough to read and there's a lot here. But again, this is part of this document that we're doing. And So what we look at are these environmental resources. And so we have to go through these categories and really identify if there's going to be an impact to the environment or not. And if there is an impact, what are the measures that will be taken to mitigate those impacts? So as you can see, there will be some impact during construction is primarily the biggest concern with these types of projects. You worry about stormwater runoff and dust and noise and those kinds of things. But really there's not a lot of long-term impact associated with these projects. Now moving on to the wastewater system. So again, we have our existing conditions. So the collection system is pretty simple. We have an 8-inch sewer line with, looks like about 5 manholes that collect all of the flow and take it to the treatment facility. So here are a couple pictures. The manholes are in pretty good shape. The operators have done some repairs, done a good job there. We did see a little leak in one of the manholes, but nothing real significant. Then onto the treatment system. So the treatment system consists of these buried fiberglass tanks, and then there's an adjacent building next to it that houses the controls and the filtration equipment. So here's a photo of these underground tanks. And this is one of the big challenges with the system. So we'll look at this, but not only is this system at capacity or over capacity, but the condition is really poor. You look in here, so there's wastewater contained in all these tanks, and there's these hatches for access. And as you can see, there's instrumentation down there, there's cords, there's electronics, there's metal components, and the majority of those components are in pretty poor condition or inoperable. Then that's a picture of the filter. Then UV disinfection, which again doesn't work, so chlorine is used. There's another picture of one of those tanks. And then we have the reuse storage lagoon. So that's a lagoon that sits right next to the fire suppression lagoon. So that lagoon, the treated wastewater gets stored in that lagoon, and then it gets land applied onto the football field during the irrigation season. So there's a photo of that pond. So that is a field draw, so it gets filled over the winter and then gets drained over the summer. And then again, the land application site, which is currently the football field. And it's pretty important as we go through this to understand, I'll hit on this again, but there needs to be a fairly high level of treatment provided to this wastewater so that it can be applied to the football field, because there are pathogen concerns there that need to be dealt with. So to kind of recap the deficiencies, so in the collection system, again, we found one little leak in a manhole, not really a big deal. At the treatment plant, there's a lot of challenges there. The flow meters have challenges working. The screening system doesn't really work at all. Very intensive from an operation and maintenance perspective. Not only from a manpower perspective, but it's an expensive system. There's a lot of replacement parts. Instrumentation and controls have challenges. Again, the condition is very poor, and the big thing is it's at capacity. If the school wants to grow, this likely is the hurdle that needs to be overcome. It's just at capacity. Filtration, operation and maintenance intensive. Again, the general condition is fairly poor. Disinfection system, the UV system doesn't work. So again, the switch to chlorine was made. And then also the reuse storage pond is at capacity. And so that's been a challenge where the operators kind of get to that period where they can irrigate. That's gotten pretty high in the past and kind of concerning to make sure that there's enough volume there to hold all that water. So again, this is those projections at this 2.5% growth rate over 20 years. So as you can see, this is the capacity, the rated capacity of the wastewater treatment system. So really, as of today, that thing is at or over capacity. And then similarly with the reuse storage lagoon, the existing capacity is about 800,000 gallons. And, it's essentially at capacity today. So as far as alternatives go, again, collection system, just a manhole repair, treatment facility. So, address existing deficiencies, and we've looked at that and we've kind of talked through that, and the existing deficiencies for the most part would be the electrical and control systems, just to kind of get things operating like they should. However, the condition is still pretty poor, so that could buy, a few years on the system, but it's not really going to be a long-term solution, or a new treatment system. And I wanted to touch on treatment alternatives again, just to kind of frame where this is going. So discharge to surface water is really not an option. That's something that most communities do, but the river up here is protected, and getting a permit to discharge wastewater there is challenging, if not impossible. And the limits that would be imposed on that are very, very stringent. So really the alternatives that we looked at focused on continued reuse application. And really there's kind of two options. One is the Class B reuse. So that's what's currently done. So this Class B water is able to put on the football field during times of non-use. So it is a high level of treatment for pathogen reduction. And really mechanical treatment and filtration are required to achieve this Class B reuse. We did look at a Class C reuse. So this is a lower level of treatment. It's really lagoon based, and a lot of communities in Idaho do this. And it's also an agricultural type application where it would be put on a crop. Oftentimes it's alfalfa hay, because it does have to be harvested essentially. Again, lower level of treatment. So what that does is the site actually has to be restricted from public access. So if we tried to do a Class C reuse site here, it would have to be fenced off, posted, and separated from the public, essentially.
So our current is Class B?
Correct. Yep. And it requires a large footprint. So let me kind of take so this is in the facility plan. So this is that Class C alternative, including a lagoon system. So again, here are the current facilities, and this would be, an approximate size of a lagoon required to treat the flow. There is a wetland identified through here, so we have to stay away from that. And then this would be a Class C application site, almost 3 acres. A few things to note: there's separation distances required between the site and this wetland, but then there's also separation requirements from the property line, and also from the well. So one of the big challenges with this type of arrangement is if the school district wanted to do this, they would likely need to control this property outside of that area, because wells could not be drilled in those areas, because there has to be a certain buffer distance away from that. So without controlling that property, that can lead to future challenges. And then again, just the size of this space that would have to be restricted from the public, and then to have a lagoon system on site. Lagoons do generate odors and attract flies and waterfowl and those kinds of things. So at the end of the day, we just didn't feel like this was a good option to carry forward. Then disinfection, again, UV or chlorination, and then reuse storage. So there's a couple options here. So kind of a relationship between the water and the wastewater system is if the tank option is selected on the water system improvements, then that current fire storage pond could be repurposed for reuse storage. So that would be an overall benefit to the wastewater system, is that could again be repurposed to be a bigger lagoon there, because extra storage is needed, or build a new separate storage lagoon. So looking at these alternatives, again, we kind of looked at the gamut here a little bit. So the manhole rehabilitation, that's pretty straightforward and easy. Address existing deficiencies is about a $300,000 estimate. A new treatment system, that gets into a fairly sizable construction cost. But again, that's a new system that is going to last, 20 plus years and handle the capacity and growth that's anticipated. And then considering the storage, repurposing the fire suppression lagoon, it's about an $800,000 lift. And then to construct an entirely new storage lagoon is a little over $2 million. And one of the things kind of specific to that is there's high groundwater here, so those have to be constructed above essentially current grade because they can't be constructed in groundwater. So there's quite a bit of expense associated with that. And then here again, the environmental impact. These are all, again, pretty utility based. The one that kind of stands out a little bit if you look at this is this Class C reuse. Really from an environmental perspective and public health and quality, there's some concerns with that alternative. Bless you. So then looking at some of the alternative cost scenarios, so I'm going to just kind of give the introduction to this and then turn it over to Michael and Christina to talk about the financing and funding. But again, we kind of just wanted to bookend what these anticipate or estimated costs are, just to give people kind of an understanding of what we might be looking at. So this would be kind of the minimum bookend piece. So to address minimum deficiencies, so in the water system and then the wastewater system, the total estimated cost is roughly $500,000. So that's kind of one of the cost scenarios. And then the other bookend really addresses the 20-year system needs. And so there, again, this is for discussion purposes, but we looked at water alternative 5 from a cost perspective. And then from a wastewater perspective, looked at a new treatment system and assuming that we were going to be able to repurpose that fire lagoon. And then that total estimated cost is right around $11 million. So again, those are kind of the bookends for both the water and the wastewater upgrades that we can consider from a financing strategy perspective. And with that, I'll turn it over to Christina.
Okay. Thanks, Stuart. Hi, everybody. Thanks for having us tonight. Okay, so much like what Stuart just went through with developing a facility plan, one thing that we also like to do is to help our communities develop what's called a strategic funding plan. And so I'll just kind of give the high notes on this. So what we try and do is we work with the community and we determine program eligibility. We have done some of that preliminary work. We've talked with numerous agencies about the school district at a high level just to understand, are they eligible for this particular low interest or grant program. So what we do is we then identify what is viable and what is not. We want to collaborate with the stakeholders. That includes Randy and your staff, as well as the school board, the community, and really see what project do you want to move forward with, if at all. And then we'll go ahead and we'll execute that funding plan once an alternative has been selected, unless it is a no action alternative, and then we will not proceed with that. So once again, the school board or the school district as a whole will actually determine the scope. And as the authority of the school district, the school board will actually come back after a 30-day public comment period. This is the beginning of that 30-day comment period, by the way. You'll have a 30-day comment period. We'd love for comments to be received from the public that's online and attending, those of you in the audience, and those in the community. And then what will happen is all of those comments will be contemplated by the school board. And at that time, near time in the future, an alternative or alternatives will then be selected. And then we'll be able to understand, what is the cost here? And then what we'll want to do is complete funding applications. So we've done some preliminary work on that, but they do all have their own specific types of applications, and we would work closely with the school district on submitting those. And they do have different milestones and timelines and what have you. And the one thing that I just want to mention is that the funding agencies do need to understand that if the school district chooses to move forward with a project, that they have actually obtained a debt approval from their voters. And I think Michael will address that a little bit more here when he comes up. So let's talk just briefly about a couple of one federal program that we've looked into and one state program. And you all probably know quite a lot about those programs. The Idaho Department of Environmental Quality has a state revolving fund loan. It is a low interest loan, typically 20 to 30 years. They do have a fixed interest rate, and right now that does range anywhere between less than 1% to up to 3%. And so they may be changing those interest rates. I don't know. I will leave that to Michael to talk about. And then the Department of Agriculture, the rural development, so USDA RD is what they are known as. They have a water environment program, and the school district is eligible to seek funding through USDA through that WEP program, the Water Environmental Program. What's nice about their terms, they're typically a little longer, 40 years. They do also have a fixed interest rate. It's typically a little higher. But they can bring grant monies to a project, to a water or a wastewater infrastructure project. And so we would just work with the school district if that is something that they would like to pursue. And I'll just back up really quickly. I did mention that there are milestones. So every agency does have their milestones. So when applications can be submitted, so for example, DEQ, they require that their applications are due typically in January, and then USDA does accept applications year-round. And they're very competitive programs, but we have it, we have had those preliminary discussions, and we believe the school board could consider those as well as they're looking at how to finance these projects. And so with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Mr. Keith.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Christina. Appreciate it. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. So as we kind of do shift into kind of the next stage, talking about financing, I'm Michael Keith. I'm with Zion's Bank. I've been the district's financial advisor for a while, kind of helping them with bonds and kind of figuring out what the tax impact would be for the taxpayers if they choose to use one of these scenarios. And as Christina kind of pointed out, and Stuart has pointed out, we're kind of doing a bookend approach to say, like, here's kind of the low end of what that cost could look like if we just kind of did the minimum work. If we did, as a community and as a school district, decided to kind of pursue that 20-year scenario, here's kind of what that would look like from a cost. Before I kind of dive into my slides, the thing is just kind of remember about school districts that, as Christina pointed out, for a school district to enter into debt, long-term debt, they do have to go to the voters and get that authorization. And this is unique because, typically when we're going for a general obligation bond, which is the only option a school district has, they're funding school facility projects, right? Buildings. But in this case, we're, doing a water and sewer project. So this is certainly kind of a unique situation, but the district can do that. They can still, once they have that debt authorization, then they can engage with some of these other funding agencies, as Christina has pointed out, looking for some of those low cost financings from DEQ, grant funding, and all the things that Christina and Stuart are going to be helping the district try to figure out how to lower the cost as much as possible on the project. But from a cost perspective, again, to kind of put this a little bit in perspective, rates have gone up, but DEQ does their financings a little differently. They only set the rates once a year as part of their process. That gets done at the beginning of the year. As Christina had pointed out, range of rates have kind of been in kind of the low 1s to 3%. And so we're making some assumptions here on rates, and I have added 1% into that for DEQ funding, just because I know there's upward pressure on rates. DEQ will reset that next year before this district has an opportunity to go for financing. So we're trying to build some cushion into what we think the cost of this might be for the public in terms of where we think rates are going on this. So I kind of wanted to bring that forward. So from a tax pact, in looking at this, we had kind of a $475,000 option. Again, that was kind of the low end, do the minimal, both on the water side and on the wastewater side. If the district chooses to do that and get authorization for a bond for $475,000, it would likely be a shorter bond. It would need to be as long. It would probably be 10 years. So the interest rate's going to be a little lower on that at 2.75%. From an impact perspective, total cost, that means your interest cost over that 10 years would be just under $100,000. So about $98,000 on that loan. So total cost of $573. And I've got some additional slides that talks about, okay, well, what does that mean? How do we translate that into kind of a cost per home and kind of tax levy and what that means in terms of what it would cost to actually fund that project? If you move to the next one over, we had kind of, this is going for everything, right? Going the other way up to that $11 million bond, where we kind of have the full, it was like, I think 1.9 million on the water side, with the remaining portion of that being on the wastewater side project. Those two projects, because it's a larger size, we would extend that out longer to 20 years to try to minimize the tax impact on the community. And so there we'd be looking at around a 3% rate on that today, at 1% over what DEQ is offering. That translates roughly into about $4.4 million in interest costs and kind of a total cost over the 20 years of about 15.4. And then the other option we have on here is just if, we're able to get some additional funding, right? Get some grant funding to help offset that. What does that mean to the community? Well, so if we can get $2.5 million in grant funds, which we think are available and out there and pursue, and again, that would be Christina and Stuart would be working hard to try to get those funds for the district. If we're able to bring those in, then of course that offsets the cost. We're bringing that down to $7.5 million that we have to now borrow to get the same $11 million project. If we had, $2.5 to $3.5 million of grant funds in there, cutting your interest cost down to under $3 million and total project cost at about 10.5. So what does that mean? So from a levy perspective, again, this would be property tax backed. That's how the district would repay the bonds that they would be asking for if they decide to move forward with this project. Currently, the levy for the district for all their levies is of $1.1 million. On the small loan for $475,000, not much impact if we wrap around the existing debt that the district does have that runs through, I believe, 2028. It would be about $11,000, call it $12,000 in interest cost. That would equate into, a tax rate of about, call it 91 cents increase over what they were paying now. So right now, that equates to $83.94 per 100,000 annually. And so it would be a 91 cent increase annually over that. So it wouldn't be much impact on the 475. If we shift to the bigger bond, Then, that interest cost on that loan, goes up that we'd be paying while the existing debt is outstanding. So that means we're paying about $333,000 in interest, total levy of about $1.4 million each year for the bonds and the supplemental that the district has. So that equates into about $25.18 per 100,000 annually. So a total levy of about $109 versus the $83.94 the district has now. And of course, we go to the other side, we get grant money, that goes down, and it'll only be $17 annual increase per 100,000. So how do we size that up to a home, right? How do we take this? Great, we got this tax rate per 100,000. How does that impact a average cost home in Garden Valley from there? So looking at a $550,000 home, remember you get the homeowner's exemption off the top of that, right? So $125,000 that does not get taxed under Idaho as an exemption to your property, which includes 1 acre of land. That would reduce the cost or the taxable value, as we call it, to $425,000. So on a $425,000 home, that 91 cents, right, would cost you $3.85 annually, right, on your $550,000 home. If we go to the larger scale bond, then that cost shifts from $3.85 to $107 annually, that there would be an increase. And if you break that down into, well, what does that mean for a monthly payment? It's about $9 a month, right, in terms of an increase on that size of a home. And of course, again, as we try to look for grant funding and reduce that cost, if we're able to achieve that and get the cost of the bond down to $7.5 million, that means that your cost would be about $72 annually and about $6 monthly. So, again, I think property taxes are the only thing that's available to the district to finance a project like this. So there would be a tax impact. The district would have to go for authorization from the voters. They get 4 dates to do that, which would either be, March, May, August, or November of each year. And so that would again be a determination by the district and the board to decide that, hey, this is a project that we want to move forward and we want to fix, and we want to go to the voters. Then they would have to kind of go through that process, which would be very similar to this. There would be, additional public process that they would put it out. They would have to pass an election resolution prior to the election to move forward with this type of financing. So just kind of a quick overview on kind of how that tax impact would work and what this project might cost taxpayers, to give you some context as we kind of go into this comment period for the next 30 days and get some feedback from the community on what they think that the district might want to do with this. So I'll turn it back over to whoever wants to come back up. Okay.
So really wrapping everything up as far as next step goes. Again, this would be really an accelerated schedule if the board decided to move forward with, putting together a funding plan, putting in applications at the beginning of next year, potentially consider, a bond election in the first half of next year. So anyways, the timeline would slide depending on what decisions are made, but these are really the next steps moving forward. The big thing is select an alternative, and then based on that, we will finalize the facility plan, and then we would put together, again, if the board decides to move forward, with the project, then we would go to work. Christina would head up putting that strategic funding plan together, meeting with agencies, and then preparing for the applications to be submitted in early 2023. Okay. That's it. Thanks, everyone. Any questions that we can address?
Yeah, we want anybody that's here, please ask questions. We've got the engineering experts, the financial experts here. Obviously, as a school board, the board will be making a decision as to what they feel like is the best alternative going forward, and then we work on financing from that standpoint, so.
So the grant possibly looked at 50% to cover, or what percentage to cover?
So the 50% is related to the planning grant that Stuart talked about. As far as grant funding for a design project, a construction project, we've seen, 20-30% grants, sometimes even more. So we would just work with the district and work with the agencies to try and see what we could come up with.
Will they still do an interest, a lower interest with the grant, or is it one or the other? Or-
Yeah, it could possibly be both.
So
It's-
if they pass the 11 million levy, and then we end up getting a grant, what happens to that extra money that we got for the levy?
So really, I mean, there's a couple of options. One is obviously to lower the tax impact, okay, because we don't need 11 million anymore. The other option is if it were worded a certain way in the election, that money could be used for capital improvements or other things if the voters approve that. But it's got to be disclosed up front as to what that money would be used for. Does that make sense? So the main thing would be lower. Did I say that correct, Michael? Okay.
So I have a question for both Stuart and Michael. If we're looking at the option one, which would be the minimum deficiencies, do you think that gain will get us, if we're looking at a 10-year payout on it, or 2 years out? So are those minimum deficiencies, do they have at least a 12-year life, or are we going to be in paying off a bond that we still are having to fix a major project with going to a whole nother?
That's exactly right. It does not address those 20-year needs. Essentially, on the wastewater system specifically, you're already at capacity, so it would essentially limit the ability to take on more students. And then also, again, the condition of the system, I can't tell you it's going to last 1 year or 5 years, but I would be pretty comfortable saying it'd be 5 years maximum,
So
in
it wouldn't
our
last 10
opinion.
years, yet we're going for a 10-year loan.
Potentially.
That's a good point, yeah.
Yeah, that's the-
And that was just doing the existing deficiencies type deal, yeah.
Yeah, and that's a pretty challenging scenario to accept. Typically when you look at a bond and the timeline on that bond, you certainly want the utilities to last the life of the bond.
And I'm glad you brought that up because that's a good challenge that the board has to consider is, okay, yeah, there's some things that can be done right now that will address deficiencies, but we have to look out into the future and where we're going to be 10 years from now, 20 years from now, and make sure we,
Potentially would be in a 10-year loan on a project.
On a
that-
5-year project.
And have to go into another loan.
yeah, exactly, before paying off the 10-year, exactly.
Back on slide 20, you were talking about the new storage tank, and I'm confused. No capacity for water, potable water, that's all fire suppression.
There's two different options with that.
Repeat the question.
Sure.
So we can hear it home.
So the question was, with the storage tank option, would it be used just for fire suppression or could it also be used for supply?
Drinking water.
Yes. And so there's kind of two options here. One is just the storage tank and it would be connected to that fire pump that would provide just fire suppression flow, replace the existing lagoon. Kind of the second option would be have that storage tank, have it connected to the fire pump, but then also add in a new booster station. So a pump out of that tank that would supply the normal domestic needs, so to speak, for the school. So the well would pump into the tank and then the booster station would pump from the tank to the school. Terry.
I believe your specific facility plan, you have no design. So when we go to look at these alternatives,
Yes.
And repeat the questions.
Yeah, so the question was, looking at a treatment upgrade, what type of treatment system would be proposed? And so baseline, it would be an activated sludge plant. So whether it's an MBR or an SBR with a filter, that is kind of yet to be determined, but we've really categorized it as it's got to be a mechanical treatment plant with filtration because we need to make Class B water to put it on the football field.
So that wouldn't affect the classification of the plant.
Correct. It should.
If we upgraded, say, sand, if we go into some alternatives such as UV,
Mhm.
would that change the classification?
We'll have to really look at that. So the question was will it change the classification of the plant? Potentially. We'll have to look at that, Terry, because you're exactly right. If we decide we want to install, say, a new treatment system and add in, UV and mechanical screens, would that kick it into a higher level of classification?
Which would be more expensive to the school.
Right.
So let me ask a follow-up on that. So if with the new option, looking down the road for the new plant, is there a possibility of getting to a Class A discharge from that plant?
There is.
And would that then be allowed to be irrigated year-round and not just at certain times?
No.
Still not, okay.
What a Class A would do is allow you to irrigate, it's called unrestricted reuse.
Uh-huh,
So you could essentially use it on all the school grounds.
right,
But it's a lot more expensive to get to.
okay,
Typically, Class A is a great option when it's really needed. Most places, it's pretty unique to have a Class A system in Idaho. Most are Class B or C, just because that expense to get to Class A is pretty high.
okay. So with the bookend option, the high end,
Mhm.
that would still have us at Class B.
Correct.
Okay.
I guess we don't really see a need for Class A.
Okay,
If the board came and said, we want to be able to irrigate all of the landscape around here and do it at any time, that certainly could be considered.
okay.
I think I got the classification, but the way it's talking about discharging, I'm talking about.
Operation, correct.
So, our Class B is really what we need. We don't want to apply for Class A. And Class C is really, we don't have to property.
Right, but Class C didn't seem like a good
If we go to a higher, say an S or MER, we go to an MER, and it requires more treatment. I'm worried about operations classification exceeding, to say, a level 3 or level 4.
Right.
Can you kind of repeat his?
Yeah, so really it's just kind of a repeat of the operations requirements and the level of, so there's classifications related to kind of how sophisticated a treatment system is, and the more sophisticated, the higher level of operation is required from a license perspective. So that was the question there. And again, once a real option is selected, that's an exercise we'll go through.
Any other questions? Now's the time to ask while we have the experts here. And for the folks watching at home, if you want to email me, email the school, just get us your questions, or you can write them, deliver them, come by, whatever. We'll get the questions out to these guys to answer, and we've got 30 days for that comment period, correct?
Yep.
Okay. Anyone else? If you think of something later, feel free to reach out to us. Well, Christina, Stewart, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Michael, thank you so much for explaining the financial side of this. And like I said, we've got to gather all the comments and evidence and present it to the board and make a decision here in the next month or so. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.
Appreciate you being here.